Hi y'all, welcome back to the garden. Today we have a specific task, and that's because there is a fungus among us. So a couple videos ago I mentioned that I was not going to be treating for black spot before winter, because why do that, right? All the leaves are about to fall off, not a big concern. But then I remembered that some fungus, including black spot, can linger over in your garden until the next season, and that is not something we want. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about fungicides, some things you should consider, and application methods. This week I've been working out in the garden a little bit. Fall has finally arrived, the humidity has dropped, the weather is wonderful. Today is the most beautiful fall day. I covered all of the front lawn trees with mulch this past weekend to get them prepared for winter. I need to do a little bit of dividing, but I also finished planting everything in the ground over a week ago. I got it done before we had some rain last week, and I don't know that I've ever been finished planting things this soon in the garden. So that's a big success. So let's talk a little bit about fungicides. This has been a terrible year for fungus. For this region, and it may be at your region too. We had a very wet season, the first half of the season. Then it got very dry, but we had intense humidity. So it was very difficult to beat off fungus earlier in the season and not have it catch up to us later in the season without any type of application. So early in the season, I was on top of it. I was applying copper fungicide. I did it in a video. There was an article that came out on Heirloom Roses about my treatment method for copper fungicide. But this is important differences here when we're talking about fungicides. Whether it's preventative or whether it's curative. So copper fungicide is a preventative. It will not cure a fungus that is already existing in your garden. So if you've been applying copper fungicide religiously throughout the season and then you see black spot, you might as well switch to something that is a curative. And there are a couple issues going on in my garden on a broad range of plants. So we have black spot on roses. I have a leaf spot on hydrangeas, going so far as to see Paniculetas have leaf spot on some of their leaves this year, which I have never seen. And then I have some perennials that are suffering from like powdery mildew and were throughout the season that I probably should have got on earlier in the season. But one thing when you're looking at fungicides, we're going to just go over some considerations. I'm not going to recommend anything to spray in this video. I think you should take your property considerations, your weather considerations, and determine what is best for you, whether that be an inorganic approach or an organic approach. There's not always an organic approach to all type of funguses, but I would suggest to the extent you can use an organic approach. So I'm combating leaf spot and black spot primarily is what I'm going to be looking at treating. We'll also talk about some treatment methods. So some things are topical or they're applied directly to the leaves or the plant. And then there are also some things that are drench that can be absorbed by the plant, and those things are systemic. So when a fungicide is systemic, it means it absorbed by the plant, translocated throughout the plant, and so there's a potential for that fungicide to enter both the blooms and the pollen, so that's something to consider as far as your pollinators. Both drenches and topicals can be systemic, so that's something to look out for and do your research on based on the products you are using. Topicals typically want to be applied until the leaves are wet or until they are fully coated. The most important aspect about applying any fungicide, herbicide, or insecticide, pesticide is to read the label instructions. Some want to be sprayed until they're coated, some may need to be sprayed until there's runoff, which means it's just dripping, but it's also important to recognize the tool you should use to apply fungicides. So earlier this season, I was showing you this little container that I was using to apply copper fungicide as a preventative. Great container. This is actually what I was spraying BT in for my cabbages and on my petunias earlier this season, and kales, but they do make bottles of this that spray upside down. Important application method for fungicides are you want to coat the top and bottom of the leaves or follow label instructions, but typically you need to cover the entire plants. So this one specifically does not spray upside down, which is a pain, but they do make varieties of these 𝗣𝗢𝗗𝗘𝗢 sprayers that spray upside down, so that's helpful. There's also this little sprayer, which I've had for years, and I've shown on YouTube probably 4 or 5 years ago, spraying boxwoods with a pine resin for winter damage protection. It has a little cone at the end and you can twist it up and down, which allows you to get kind of underneath the plant and then switch it to go on top of the plant, and also extends if you want to go out at a distance so you don't have to bend over so much. These are really great. I haven't put a whole lot of use into this one since I moved into the property because my garden has gotten so big. But today I'm going to be breaking out the big tools, and this is a Sprayers Plus sprayer. If you're interested, I'll put links to this below. I really love this brand. I've had a 4-gallon backpack sprayer that I purchased over 5 years ago. I've had it long before I started YouTube, and they work really well. So I purchased a 2-gallon version, this one right here, earlier in the season or last year. It was potentially last year. And this is a brand new unused one that I just bought last week. I'm not affiliated with them, but I do love their products. It's electric, there's no pumping. You can use the wand up and down and all over the plant really easily, and they're just super simple to use and mix up in a nice, easy carrying container to spray all sorts of things around the garden. Now, some other things are to consider is I'm not going to be spraying on camera because I like to do my sprays like this when it gets dark, and it'll be too dark for you to see on camera when I spray these. Primarily for pollinators. Pollinators go to bed later when the sun starts setting, so there's less risk of damage, whether organic or inorganic. Both can be detrimental to pollinators potentially. And also some fungicides, if sprayed during the day, can actually damage or burn the leaves of the plant. That probably may not happen this time of year when there's less sun exposure, but the fall and winter sun can still be kind of intense on some plants. So you want to make sure you're spraying in the evening after the pollinators go to sleep. There are also a ton of fungicides, both organic and inorganic. Like I said, copper fungicide is a great one to get started in the spring, and that's what I was using as a preventative, but there are also some other organic fungicides, including some bacterias that kind of outcompete the fungus. There's some sprays that are also organic that kind of boost the immune system of plants. So definitely do some research on those, figure out which ones you want to use. They're not all super cheap, and so to the extent I want you to focus on treating the issue, so make sure the issue you're having is identified and it's on the fungicide. Don't spray anything willy-nilly just because you think it might treat it. Know that it treats it and use good practices. And then make sure you know what the active ingredient is on what you're applying, because that's really helpful when you're comparing prices of products. Because a lot of these products, they may have so many different names all over the market by different manufacturers, but in the end, the percentage of the active ingredient is what's most important. So that's why I really don't like to recommend anything. It's so dependent on your environment, your conditions. So let's take a look at some of the plants I'm battling issues with so you can get an idea of what I'm trying to fix as we head into next year. So some plants are just more prone to specific funguses than others, and so that's part of what my goal is as a gardener, is to find the plants that don't tend to have a lot of issues, because typically my last resort is to treat anything. But if it's becoming a serious enough issue that it's affecting other plants, or the plant is just not looking its best and I know it could do better, I will spray to the extent I need to. So the first one is going to be black spot on roses. So this one right here, you can see the black spot on these roses here, riddled with black spot. You can see all the defoliated leaves on the ground. This is one that I treated with copper fungicide earlier in the season, and then I just was not able to get to treating any other of its issues later in the season, so it's kind of suffered. So this may be one that, although I'm not doing a whole lot of pruning going into fall on my roses, this may be one I want to completely defoliate because it's had such a problem. Clean up the leaves underneath it to the extent I can, and apply repeated applications of a fungicide to combat the issues that it's having, because there may just be black spot lingering around in this area. Down here we have some Hydrangea 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗗𝗢 hybrids, and you can see the leaf spots on these leaves as well that need to be treated. You can see these are Panicle hydrangeas as well, also showing signs of a leaf spot as we head into fall. So although it's not as much of an issue, I think, with paniculatas, I do want to treat these and make sure this is taken care of so we don't have this issue next year, or so that we're less likely to have this issue next year. If we have a season next year like we did this year where it was so rainy and humid, it's just really difficult. Like, these things are exposed, my property is really exposed. That's something I'm having to deal with in this new garden that I'm not used to. In my prior garden, I was in a subdivision. My property was not that exposed. I'm more in the country now. I have lots of elements and other things to contend with. And I've noticed, one, increased pest pressure and increased fungicide or fungus pressure in the garden. So those are just things that I have to take care of preventatively. And so next year I'm going to be trying a multitude of preventative organic sprays, copper fungicide, and alternating with some other things I'm doing some more research on over winter. And that's another thing about fungicide application, is you want to rotate your sprays anyway that are targeted towards treating a specific issue. So if I have black spot and I'm treating it with a specific fungicide with a certain active ingredient, I would want to next time potentially treat it with a different product with a different active ingredient that's still targeted to treat black spot, so that the fungus does not become resistant to treatment in your garden. Now, one of the worst hydrangea offenders in the garden this year with a fungus issue on its leaves was this mountain hydrangea. This is Tuff Stuff Red, which has been discontinued by proven winners, probably for performance, but also maybe that it had a issue with fungus on its leaves. So you can see how terrible this one looks. I am considering removing this one next year. It's been in the garden 2 years. I planted it, I may have actually planted this in the fall of 2023. I can't remember, but it produced no blooms for me this year. And the foliage isn't even pretty because it's been riddled with fungus all season. So there are much better varieties that are performed better by proven winners on the market. And so I might just be replacing this with another hydrangea, or I might find a different shrub because I have lots of hydrangeas around it to replace it with. An important point of just managing this whole issue is, to the extent you have fungus in your garden on certain plants, remove the foliage from those plants. It's particularly important with black spot. Remove the foliage over fall. Get as many leaves as you can out of your garden and treat the remaining issues to see if you can get rid of it. Because if you leave some leaves and it lingers over winter, it will just potentially infect the same plant in the spring, and then you've got this repetitive cycle of issues. So this is something that I'm going to be focusing on over the next season. Now that all of my projects, my major projects, are done, and I'm pretty much done expanding most of the garden into beds that I can right now. We'll see what happens in the future, but I want to keep it manageable, as I've mentioned. I'm going to turn my attention to more getting into the habit of taking care of the plants I have, and that includes regularly treating those that I need to treat for their best performance. I don't typically love treating plants, and I try to plant plants that don't have issues, but sometimes even the best spread plants that are resistant to things can have just issues based on the weird growing season that we had this year. You can only throw so much water at something and so much humidity at something in a dry climate and it not get a fungus when it's exposed outside. And as with all things that I'm doing in the garden these days, to the extent I'm applying fungicide to any particular plant, I will probably note it in my plant library that I'm keeping track of, just so I know for myself that I might want to treat this in the spring, because I probably won't remember. And also that if you grow it in similar conditions, that may be something you need to take into account depending on your climate and local conditions. That being said, I am going to be treating all of my roses for black spot just preventatively as we head into fall. Because I want them to do their best waking up next year. I want a really great rose year next year. I want things to look really great. Some of these roses will have been in the ground for, it'll be starting their 3rd season. Next year is the year of leap for my garden and most things in my garden, so I'm really excited about what next year holds. All right, thank y'all for joining me on this little video, and remember, be a light. Take care. Bye.